Is Antonin Kinský ready to be Spurs #1? He was substituted on March 10th after 17 minutes in his Champions League debut, but he's managed to impress Roberto De Zerbi, and he's set to be our starting goalkeeper for the coming season, having a here we go a couple of hours ago on Martin Dubravka, who looks set to be our #2. Today we're going to look at what the data actually says, whether Antonin Kinský is ready to step in as our #1 keeper, and whether the numbers really back up that decision. For anyone new to my channel, I am a ex-player and a current investment manager where I use data to find predictive signals. On this channel, we lead with the data and we use the footage to work out whether the numbers are telling us the truth. First of all, this is a chart with prevented goals per 90 on the y-axis and a distribution index that I built on the x-axis. So from going through, I've just started doing some back tests to get my rankings better. Probably do an episode on how I do this at some stage, but this is essentially key passes per 90 combined with accurate forward passes, which look the most significant when it comes to goalkeeper distribution. We've got Spurs keeper sitting on the bottom left, low distribution index, negative prevented goals per 90, and it looks like Vicario is going to be heading to Serie A after a pretty down year this season. On the surface, to me, this looks like a position screaming for investment, but maybe that is not the case. So a couple key points here. Vicario's distribution was one of the worst in the league under both Frank and Tudor this year. That was probably a little bit to do with the system, but I will show you shortly that it wasn't significantly better under Ange. Kinsky's season numbers, only 7 games, so please bear in mind that this is not necessarily statistically significant for Kinský. His numbers are also sitting in a pretty poor zone. So my first instinct says go and buy a keeper, but before we go and do that, we need to understand what De Zerbi actually needs from his goalkeepers. Let's start with a quick tactical explanation of De Zerbi's goalkeeper. So he is not looking for someone who's just a shot stopper. They're effectively going to be a third center back and pretty important in our build-up play. The keeper is going to initiate the entire attacking structure. So you're looking for short passes to center backs to bait the opposition press and create kind of a +1 numerical overload by using the keeper in the first phase. The famous studs on the ball technique, so that's where the goalkeeper is stopping the dead ball and forcing the opposition to commit. You're going to see De Zerbi looking to use that a lot. And what he's trying to do is exploit the space in behind once we can bait the press of the other team. So a couple things that are important with this, obviously short passing, comfort under pressure. Those are 2 things we've definitely seen from Kinský using our eyes in the last 7 games. And the second point with De Zerbi is he's looking for clipped passes over the press when short options are blocked. So you need a bit of range to be a De Zerbi goalkeeper, kind of mid-longer range. And not to mention you're going to need a lot of composure, which I think from what we've seen so far, I think we can argue that Kinský might fit that bill. So at Brighton, you had Robert Sanchez. He lost his place at times to Jason Steele because Steele's distribution was better, and that really shows how much this matters to Roberto De Zerbi. So the bottom line is in his system, distribution and sweeping are going to matter more than shot stopping. A keeper that can't play the ball is going to break the entire De Zerbi model. So the question isn't just, is Kinský good enough? It's, does his profile fit what De Zerbi specifically needs? So what we're going to do is we're first going to start with Kinský going back to his 23-24 season when we bought him and take a look at what we actually bought. Okay, so this is the same chart, but we've got Vicario the season prior. The key point here is I just want to show his distribution did not change year to year, but his shot stopping did. So he really had a down year this season. I think that might have been due to health, but it looks like he's headed for Serie A anyway, so we're not gonna spend too much time on Vicario today. And I wanted to set the tone here with Donnarumma as kind of a renowned good shot stopper, and Ederson in the 23-24 season, who's probably the best keeper ever, well, at least that I've seen in terms of distribution. So it's quite difficult to find a keeper that satisfies both of these. And ultimately what you're looking for with De Zerbi is probably someone who's relatively decent, neutral-ish on shot stopping, but more so kind of leaning into the distribution index. So you can see Antonin Kinský 23-24 season, which is the season we bought him. He very much fits this bill. He's a really, really strong distributor of the ball, And his shot stopping, prevented goals per 90, is essentially 0, so looking relatively neutral on that front. I wanted to quickly go through in the 23-24 season what the landscape looked like when buying young keepers. So there were 5, these are the top 5 keepers in my composite scores. I will do a video on how I score in more detail at some stage. I know this can feel arbitrary otherwise, but I promise that will come at one stage. So this is the top 5 keepers available to us when we bought Kinský. So you can see Capriel from Empoli, Chevalier, who ended up going to PSG, Antonin Kinský, who obviously we bought in January that year for 12.5 million, which I think was a really, really good price. You've got Verbruggen, who obviously went to Brighton, and now he's valued at kind of 40 plus million. And you've got Jorgensen, who went to Chelsea. So really, Spurs got quite creative and made a really, really nice data signing on this, buying one of the best young keepers in Europe at the time. So we're just going to quickly run through Kinsky's 3 last seasons. We've got the season we bought him, where you can see shot stopping, he is decent. Prevented goals is probably the one I weight the highest. Well, it is the one I weight the highest, and you can see he's not elite at it, but he's fine. He's an absolutely fine shot stopper. What you're really getting when you bought Kinský was distribution and sweeping. So that was kind of ultimately what Spurs were targeting at the time. Now, in the following season, I just want to flag for both of the Premier League season, his minutes are not high enough to be statistically significant. So there might be some flaws in this data. You can kind of see there might be points that are at 0 or 100, which is a little bit errant. His shot stopping obviously has struggled, shall we say, since he's moved to the Premier League. It's obviously a tougher league as well than the Czech league, so that's something to bear in mind. Distribution, surprisingly, in 24-25 it wasn't great, but I guess it wasn't particularly bad either. I do think in the Ange system, the key difference that you see from 23 to the following season is the long pass accuracy really falls off, and I think that that's partially systematic. So with Ange, obviously, you're looking to play short, so I think maybe the long passing point here is really that's kind of when you're just in dire need to hoof it under pressure. So I would imagine that's like less planned, so to speak, and more just kind of clearing the ball. And I would imagine that that is why the pass accuracy has decreased significantly. I think that's also true in the next season, which we're going to look at in a second. I think what's really interesting is he's actually really good in aerial duels and exits. So primarily he's a sweeper keeper, which is something we can definitely, I think, see in the eye test. But he's surprisingly good in duels, and he's really improved, sorry, just flipping back, from his time at Prague to his time in the Premier League. So we're going to look finally at the most recent season. Again, minutes are really low, so this is a pinch of salt a little bit in terms of the data. But again, shot stopping, not elite. His distribution is pretty good. You can see his through ball is actually really, really ticked up this year. And then you've got long pass accuracy, where I think you've got a bit of the same problem. Zerbi was essentially not really playing Zerbi ball. He was almost playing like Antonio Conte, in my opinion, towards the last few games, trying to keep us up. So I don't think that this is super representative of the system he's going to be playing in. But anyways, same issue with the pass accuracy, and I think that essentially goes back to the style. Again, I want to highlight his aerial duels. He's a good sweeper keeper. He's good off his line. And I think that that's going to be really, really important in the Zerbi system and in the Premier League with the way things are going. So that's the data on Kinský across 3 seasons. And now I just want to step back and say, should Spurs go and buy somebody better? So a couple talking points, I guess, is first of all, let's make the case for Antonin Kinský to start. So in 23-24, his profile is exactly what Zerbi needs. And that was a proper sample size of almost like 4,000 minutes, I believe. So that's kind of the only full sample we have of him to go off of. His best Premier League traits that we can see through his data are sweeping, and that maps directly to a Zerbi system as well. A keeper who acts as a third center back is going to be essential. His through passes recovered to the 82nd percentile in the most recent season, so that shows the passing brain is obviously still there. And I think using our eye test, we can see how calm he is on the ball. He's happy to absorb the pressure. And then I just want to point out something else that's obviously not going to be on the data is his character. So not a lot of people can come back the way he did after the Atletico game. I personally hold the opinion that he genuinely slipped a couple times, and I think the situation got really overblown. But regardless, it shows a lot to come back the way he did and perform the way he did, especially under the pressure we were under in the relegation zone. So Roberto De Zerbi's full system with Van Heck, Senesi, Robertson, new midfielders, hopefully incoming, will structurally restore his short passing and long passing accuracy because he's going to have players who actually want to receive the ball. And I think we're going to see more of a pure De Zerbi system this season where his passing range is going to be more utilized in an effective way. Something I really like about Kinský is his medium range passing is pretty good. We really saw that in his debut game against Liverpool, so that's definitely something to highlight. And as I mentioned earlier, that's going to be a way he can beat the press. And I think the last positive for this is spending nothing on a keeper frees up the budget for Tonali, Savinho, Fernandez, whoever else we're linked with, hopefully all three of those, which in my opinion is probably kind of the more pressing emergency. So I can see the merit in giving him the season. Now, I don't want to lay out an unbalanced argument, so there's also obviously a case against him here. So there's some risks. I think the save rate is, and generally the shot stopping is a risk. We did not see a lot of improvement in that season to season. I think a lot of that is due to his positioning is not amazing. So look, it's 1,300 minutes across the 2 Premier League seasons, and it's enough to take seriously, even though it's not one full season altogether. So that's definitely a concern. I do think the long pass accuracy, I've caveated, it has been poor for 2 consecutive seasons. I do think there's probably some system problems there, but at what point, I guess, do we stop blaming the system would be a fair question to raise. And then I think my biggest concern is really just the sample size. We just haven't seen much of Kinský. And if this goes wrong early in the season, the damage could be pretty significant. So we've barely survived relegation, and it's definitely a risk to take a young, pretty unproven keeper who did play particularly well in the last 7 games, to be fair to him, and have him starting. So I just want to highlight that there's absolutely risks to this strategy, even though I think there's some merit in giving him a chance. So I want to jump back into the data and see who we could buy that would genuinely be an upgrade. So I've stuck with Kinský's 23-24 data, giving him the benefit of the doubt. And we are looking at Bart Verbruggen, whom we were heavily linked to. I don't really see it personally. His distribution index is even worse than Vicario's, for example, last season, although his shot stopping is better. Although, again, it's pretty much at a neutral level. So I personally don't see the appeal of Verbruggen. He was in the same pool as Kinský in 23-24. I don't really think he's kicked on enough to warrant the amount of money we'd have to spend on him. And I'm not convinced it's a clear upgrade. Okay, and then we've got Carnesecchi and Chevalier. So Lucas Chevalier, obviously from the same pool as Kinský in the 23-24 season of the young keepers. So yeah, he's obviously at PSG. He's had a bit of a season to forget, some confidence issues probably, and he was hooked after losing his place to Safanov. He's probably available for kind of around 35-40 million euros. So he was definitely a clear option in my opinion. You've got Carnesecchi, who would cost probably something similar from Atalanta. He's a good keeper. We watched quite a bit of tape. We did an Oso Spurs podcast where we chatted briefly about him. The only thing is he does feel a little bit like buying Vicario 2.0. I do think he looks better than Vicario did, but yeah, still obviously a risk that maybe we don't want to take. So I guess the question is really, is the marginal improvement from Kinský to somebody like a Chevalier worth 35 million when we have major issues elsewhere? And I think this is where my investment manager brain is kicking in. It's not about whether the upgrade exists. It's kind of maybe about the opportunity cost here. So every pound on a keeper that is kind of not spent on our outfield, specifically the midfield and the front, is a concern to me. And also Chevalier's own numbers have dropped since moving to PSG. So environment obviously matters for keepers as well. Now, I briefly want to talk on the answer, which is Dubravka, as we've had Here We Go from Fabrizio Romano in the most recent couple of hours. So the club has decided to go with an older, experienced backup, a good backup, I should say. So he sits at the 63rd distribution index percentile, and with slightly negative kind of prevented goals. So he's comfortably above average and better than an alternative that's been raised, which is Karl Darlow in terms of distribution. So I can see why this matters for De Zerbi. He can play out from the back competently as a number 2. He's obviously had almost 200 Premier League appearances, so he understands, the league, the pressure. He's free, so there's no cost. Also, Karl Darlow would have been free. And I think we've really gone for the Stefan Ortega model. So experienced, kind of technically capable, cheap, and then he kind of monitors our young starter without really blocking his pathway. So I guess the fact that Spurs have signed Dubravka for nothing instead of spending 35 million on Chevalier tells you the club believes in Kinsky's data profile and they're backing that 23-24 ceiling as opposed to hedging the floor. So look, I guess the data tells kind of a 3-story season with Kinský. At Slavia, he was the 3rd best young keeper in Europe with elite distribution, and he looked like exactly what De Zerbi needs. In England, his distribution has maybe suffered and his save rate has dropped, but we have to be honest, it's a concern, so it's not just noise. But his sweeping stayed elite, his through balls have recovered, and his character in a relegation run-in was really honestly undeniable. So De Zerbi's actual system with players who can receive the ball and a team that plays from the back properly, which we should see this coming season, should hopefully unlock the keeper that Spurs thought they were buying. I think Dubravka for free is... I was honestly in camp of Karl Darlow, but having looked at the data, I do think Dubravka maybe fits the system better, and for free he might be the perfect safety net with tons of experience. I think we're going to back Kinský. I think I might be backing Kinský. But look, this is a gamble, and if things don't recover by winter, we might need to be looking for alternatives. I hope for his sake that he makes it, and I am absolutely rooting for him. If you are new to my channel, please feel free to like and subscribe. I'm trying to bring more data-led Spurs analysis on a weekly basis. Thank you so much.